Good evening. I am Clara Nightwell. Tonight, I am here with Rowan Hartsteele.
Good evening, Clara.
Democracy often feels inevitable in modern language, but historically, it was rare. Tonight, we return to ancient Greece to ask a structural question. Why did democracy emerge there and almost nowhere else?
A question rooted not in ideals, but in crisis, war, and institutional experimentation.
So this is not a story about philosophy first.
No. It begins with social tension inside small city-states.
Then let us begin with the instability that made participation necessary.
To understand why democracy emerged in Greece, we must begin with the structure of the polis. Greek political life was organized around small independent city-states rather than a centralized empire. Each polis combined urban center surrounding farmland and a citizen body that could gather physically in one place.
So schemated.
Very much so. Direct participation becomes possible only when numbers remain manageable. In larger territorial states like Persia or Egypt, administration required hierarchy and distance. In a polis such as Athens, citizens could assemble, debate, and vote in person. But small scale alone does not create democracy. Early Greek cities were dominated by aristocratic families who controlled land and political authority. Economic inequality produced tension between elites and indebted farmers.
So internal conflict threatened stability.
Yes, the Greeks used the term stasis to describe internal factional struggle. Without reform, cities risked civil breakdown or the rise of a single tyrant promising order. Democratic institutions in Athens emerged gradually as mechanisms to manage these tensions.
So democracy begins as stabilization, not ideology.
A decisive transformation occurred when military structure altered political balance. In earlier aristocratic systems, warfare was dominated by elite cavalry and noble lineage. But the development of the hoplite phalanx redistributed responsibility. The hoplite was not a professional soldier. He was a land-owning citizen who could afford armor and shield.
So defense became collective.
Yes, the phalanx depended on coordination rather than individual heroism. Each soldier protected the man beside him. Survival required discipline and mutual reliance. This military interdependence translated into political expectation. If citizens fought side by side to defend the polis, exclusion from decision-making became harder to justify. Later, in Athens, naval expansion intensified this shift. The Athenian fleet relied heavily on rowers drawn from lower economic classes. Maritime power elevated citizens who previously held limited influence.
So military necessity expanded participation.
Exactly. Strategic dependence created leverage. Political reformers such as Cleisthenes reorganized tribes and voting structures to dilute aristocratic dominance. The assembly became a central institution where male citizens could deliberate and decide on policy. Selection by lot for many offices reduced the consolidation of permanent political elites. Payment for jury service and participation later allowed poorer citizens to engage without economic sacrifice.
So institutions were engineered to balance influence.
Yes. Democracy in Athens was not spontaneous equality. It was the result of deliberate institutional adjustments responding to social strain, military change, and elite rivalry. Beyond military reform, Athenian democracy depended on institutional engineering. The assembly, known as the ecclesia, allowed male citizens to gather, debate, and vote directly on laws, war, and foreign policy. Participation was not symbolic. Decisions taken there carried immediate authority.
So sovereignty was visible.
Yes, political authority was enacted publicly rather than hidden behind palace walls. Another key institution was the Council of 500, selected by lot from the citizen body. This council prepared legislation and rotated membership annually, limiting long-term concentration of influence. Sortition or selection by lot was central. It reduced the permanence of political elites and reinforced the idea that governance was a shared civic duty rather than a career.
So equality was procedural.
Exactly. Equality did not mean uniform wealth or status. It meant equal opportunity to speak, vote, and hold office within the citizen class. The law courts were also expansive, often composed of large citizen juries chosen by lot. Legal disputes became collective civic processes, rather than decisions imposed by magistrates alone. Payment for jury service and later for assembly attendance enabled poorer citizens to participate without abandoning livelihood. This financial adjustment was crucial. Without it, political equality would remain formal but inaccessible. The practice of ostracism provided another structural safeguard. Citizens could vote to temporarily exile an individual perceived as dangerously powerful. This mechanism sought to prevent the re-emergence of tyranny without permanent punishment.
So democracy protected itself structurally.
Yes, Athenian democracy was not merely a belief in participation. It was an evolving network of procedures designed to distribute authority, reduce dominance, and manage factional tension. Its uniqueness lay in combining military participation, civic identity, and institutional experimentation within a small-scale society. Yet Athenian democracy was never stable by nature. Its strength was participation, but participation also amplified volatility. Large assemblies could deliberate, but they could also react emotionally to crisis.
So collective decision-making carried risk.
Yes, during the Peloponnesian War, prolonged conflict placed strain on democratic judgment. Military defeat, economic pressure, and political rivalry intensified factionalism. At moments of fear, Athens temporarily abandoned democratic procedures in favor of oligarchic control. These reversals reveal that democracy was not inevitable or irreversible. It required continual maintenance and civic commitment.
So it was structurally fragile.
Exactly. Its openness created adaptability, but also exposure. Another limitation was its narrow definition of citizenship. Women, enslaved persons, and resident foreigners were excluded from political participation. Democracy operated within a restricted civic body. Its inclusiveness applied only to those recognized as full citizens.
So, participation coexisted with exclusion.
Yes, that tension is central to understanding its historical uniqueness. Athenian democracy expanded political voice within a bounded group, but did not articulate universal equality. Philosophers such as Plato later criticized democracy for instability and susceptibility to demagoguery. Aristotle analyzed it as one constitutional form among several, each prone to corruption under pressure. Yet despite criticism, the experiment left a lasting conceptual imprint. It demonstrated that political authority could rest on deliberation rather than lineage. It revealed that law and policy could be shaped by active citizens rather than inherited hierarchy.
So even its fragility became instructive.
Exactly. Athenian democracy was neither permanent nor universal, but it proved that concentrated aristocratic power was not the only political architecture available. In the final analysis, Athenian democracy was not born from abstract commitment to equality. It emerged from a convergence of scale, military transformation, social tension, and institutional experimentation. The polis was small enough for citizens to assemble directly. Military service redistributed leverage across economic classes. Aristocratic rivalry prevented permanent consolidation under a single lineage. Reformers responded to stasis not by eliminating conflict, but by channeling it into procedure.
So democracy became a management system for tension.
Yes, its originality lies less in moral proclamation and more in institutional design. Decision by majority, rotation of office, selection by lot, public deliberation, and legal accountability formed a coordinated structure. This structure did not eliminate inequality, but it redistributed authority within a defined citizen body. Its durability depended on civic identity, shared risk, and visible participation. When external pressure intensified or internal trust eroded, the system faltered. Yet even in decline, the memory of collective self-governance persisted.
So its uniqueness was conditional, not permanent.
Exactly. Democracy in Athens was a historical contingency shaped by environment and crisis. Its later influence came not from uninterrupted survival, but from the demonstration that political authority could be organized horizontally rather than vertically. The experiment proved that participation could serve as a stabilizing force when structured carefully. That insight, rather than the specific institutions themselves, became its enduring contribution.
Before we close tonight, let us take a brief pause and welcome Margaret. Margaret, for those who want to understand how Athenian democracy actually functioned, where would you invite them to continue?
Thank you, Clara. I would suggest beginning with the Athenian constitution, attributed to Aristotle.
So this is not a philosophical ideal, but an institutional record.
Exactly. The text describes how offices were organized, how citizens were selected, and how legal and political decisions were made.
So it shows democracy as a system rather than a slogan.
Yes. It allows the reader to see the mechanisms that sustain participation and balance within the polis.
That feels essential for understanding why it emerged.
Some political systems are best understood not through theory, but through their procedures.
Thank you, Margaret. That is a thoughtful place to pause tonight.
Thank you, Clara. It was a pleasure.
The aftermath of Athenian democracy begins with a paradox. Its institutions did not spread as a stable model across the ancient world, but its existence created a permanent reference point for the idea that citizens could govern themselves.
So democracy vanished for 2,000 years.
Not entirely. It largely vanished as direct mass self-government, but civic republican experiments continued in different forms, especially in medieval and early modern city republics. What disappeared was the specific Athenian combination of direct assembly sovereignty, selection by lot, and large citizen juries as the core of state power. The long gap is not a mystery of forgotten ideas. It is largely a problem of scale, security, and administration. After classical antiquity, political authority in Europe and much of the Mediterranean was dominated by empires, kingdoms, and feudal structures. Most people were not citizens of a small polis, and united. They were subjects in large territories where communication was slow, literacy was limited, and political legitimacy was tied to dynasty, religion, and hierarchy.
So the institutional conditions were missing.
Exactly. Athens could gather citizens in one place and decide policy directly. A kingdom spanning hundreds of kilometers could not govern that way, without transforming the model into representation, bureaucracy, and layered authority. Another factor is conceptual. Many ancient writers preserved the memory of democracy, but often as a warning about instability, faction, or demagoguery. So for centuries, democracy was remembered more as a risky form than as an ideal. The re-emergence of democracy in the modern era required structural changes that Athens never faced. It required representative institutions, legal protections, and the development of the modern state.
So modern democracy is not a revival. It is a redesign.
Yes, the connection is conceptual, but the machinery is different. When we reach the 17th and 18th centuries, we see a new foundation being built. Enlightenment political theory reframed legitimacy around consent, rights, and law. This is where Athens returns not as a blueprint but as a precedent, a proof that political authority can be shared rather than inherited. In the United States, the founding period drew heavily on classical republican language, especially Roman. But Athens remained part of the intellectual background as an example of popular rule. The crucial modern innovation was representation. Rather than assembling all citizens in one place, citizens selected representatives to deliberate and legislate on their behalf. This solved the problem of scale, but it created new problems. How to prevent representatives from becoming a new elite. So modern constitutional design added mechanisms Athens did not have in the same form. Written constitutions, separation of powers, judicial review in some systems, and entrenched rights.
And France?
The French Revolution made democracy part of mass political imagination in a new way. It broke the assumption that sovereignty must reside in a king, a dynasty, or a privileged estate. Its language of citizenship, rights, and popular sovereignty traveled widely, even where its institutions did not. But the French Revolution also revealed a recurring tension in democratic history. When political legitimacy shifts to the people, the question becomes how to translate that legitimacy into stable procedure. The 19th century then becomes crucial, because this is when mass participation expands alongside state capacity. Industrialization, urbanization, print culture, and expanding education created larger publics capable of sustained political life. At the same time, modern administrations developed the ability to count, tax, register, and govern populations systematically. Elections, parties, and parliaments became scalable instruments for participation in large states.
So, democracy required infrastructure.
Yes, not only roads and printing presses, but administrative and legal infrastructure. In Latin America, independence movements in the early 19th century adopted republican constitutions and the language of popular sovereignty. Yet the challenge was structural. New states faced inequality, regional fragmentation, and weak institutions inherited from colonial governance. Many societies formally embraced constitutionalism while struggling to stabilize executive power, build trust in elections, and limit military intervention in politics. This shows an important distinction. Democratic language can travel faster than democratic institutions.
So the form can exist without the stability.
Exactly. And this helps explain why the world can appear more democratic on paper than it is in lived institutional practice. In the 20th century, two large processes pushed democracy outward. First, mass politics expanded further. Universal suffrage became a norm in many places, making legitimacy increasingly dependent on broad participation. Second, after major global conflicts, many states adopted constitutional and electoral frameworks as a basis for reconstruction and international recognition. Decolonization also produced many new states, and elections became a common method for claiming legitimacy in the modern international system.
So democracy becomes a global language of legitimacy.
Yes, even regimes that do not fully permit open competition often borrow democratic vocabulary, because popular sovereignty has become a widely recognized standard. But the deeper reason many countries move toward democracy is not only idealism, it is that modern states are difficult to govern without some form of consent, participation, and predictable succession. Democratic mechanisms offer a method for transferring authority without constant violence, and for integrating disagreement into procedure. In that sense, democracy functions as a management system for mass societies, similar to how Athens used procedure to manage stasis within a small polis.
So the continuity is structural.
Exactly. Athenian democracy proved that procedure can redistribute authority and stabilize conflict. Modern democracies do not copy Athens directly, but they inherit the same underlying insight. Legitimacy and stability are strengthened when power is shared, accountable, and renewed through recognized rules. The thousands of years between them are the story of building states large enough to require representation, and societies complex enough to demand institutional limits.
Thank you for staying with us tonight. And thank you, Rowan, for guiding us to the structure behind democracy.
Thank you, Clara. Some political forms endure not because they are simple, but because they evolve.
If this conversation stayed with you, you are welcome to like, comment, and subscribe. You will find other episodes here where history, ideas, and power are approached slowly. Until next time, stay with us.